I'm Professor Stephen Coleman, and I've spent many years researching and writing about political communication. I'm interested in how politicians speak to us, how we speak to them, and what we think of each other. In today's episode, I'll be looking at the American presidential election of 2024 and asking the question, what has happened to American political discourse? And to help me do that, I'll be interviewing the Professor of Rhetoric and Politics, Robert Asen.
I'm not going to answer the question because the question is radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then have a conversation, okay?
Please.
Okay.
But we're not afraid of weird people. We're a little bit creeped out, but we're not afraid.
We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
The Sound of Politics with Professor Stephen Coleman. Election Special.
What does politics sound like when it's clearly not working?
And you know, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that said, take a look at what happened.
You know that politics is not working when you hear the sound of gunshots. The arguing is over. The fighting begins.
Fight! 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 Fight!
The chant of anti-politics. Fight, fight, fight. This is the antithesis of reasoned argument. How does politics descend into such a dismal state? For some, the answer is simple. Trump has polluted the democratic waters. In breaking nearly every rule of decent public discourse, they say, he's dragged the United States into the political gutter. That's a temptingly simplistic analysis, but I'm sceptical of claims that ascribe cultural failure entirely to just one man. We're looking here at longer-term trends, not just American but global, not just Trumpian but of broader and deeper origin. Let me outline the three factors that I think are in play here before discussing them with my guest today, Professor Robert Asen. Firstly, there are two basic conceptions of political communication that we can sign up to. The first I refer to as the Machiavellian strategy, where winning is everything and all tactics are legitimate. The second I refer to as the democratic forum, where the battle of ideas is central and victory depends upon the force of the best arguments. These conceptions are clearly diametrically opposed. Most political democracies comprise a mix of both, with greater effectiveness when the principles of the democratic forum prevail over Machiavellian strategy. But when the latter comes to dominate, crowding out the norms of argumentative give and take and turning politics into a tactical war zone, political communication descends into a form of purely aggressive, politically hollow marketing. Over the past 6 or 7 decades, we've allowed that to happen, praising political campaigners for their slick Machiavellian ruthlessness and professionalising the ethos of the political marketplace. The second factor concerns how opponents are imagined. Politics, of course, is about disagreement, sometimes of a fierce nature, so it's hardly reprehensible to disagree strongly with your political opponents. But when disagreement turns into demonisation and it is argued that people on the other side don't deserve to have a voice or to be treated as worthy of human dignity, then there's no scope for the democratic forum. Debate turns into dismissal. Instead of wanting to persuade the other side, you want to lock them up. There lies the demise of democratic civility. And politics has been drifting in that direction for a rather long time. Think of Winston Churchill's pernicious post-war claim that his opponents were no different from the German Gestapo. Thirdly, and I don't need to expand on this one, where only partisan news media exists, the function of news ceases to be cross-cutting exposure to ideas and becomes a form of daily reinforcement of entrenched prejudices. The United States, in the run-up to its presidential election, illustrates vividly all three of these tendencies. Trump did not bring them about. They brought him about. Well, my guest today, Robert Asen, who is the Stephen E. Lucas Professor of Rhetoric, Politics and Culture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has for many years produced books and articles on speech and communication that I regard to be penetrating and amongst the most insightful in their field. We'll talk to him today about some of these trends in the lead-up to the American presidential election of 2024. Well, Robert, it's great to have you with me today. Let me start with this question. Should Americans be worried about the quality of their democracy in the run-up to this presidential election?
Yes and no. Yes, I think there are many things to be worried about. I think the influence of money in politics, the rise in far-right politics, not only in the United States, but across the globe, the effort to divide people, to think in terms of us versus them, rather than to find those things that bring us together. All of those things are causes of great concern and should cause us worry. At the same time, I think we can find examples, perhaps not necessarily at the national level all the time, but sometimes, and certainly at the local level and elsewhere, people working together in a spirit of democracy and sometimes really addressing very difficult issues and differences and doing so in ways that are productive.
Robert, are they parallel pathways or do they cross? Because I'm very attracted to the important point you make about civil society and what's going on away from the centre. But I guess the question I then want to ask is, to what extent can what is happening at the centre just carry on degenerating in ignorance of everything else that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is certainly a kind of disconnect between some of our most prominent institutions, the federal government among them, and various parts of the federal government, the courts, for example, the Supreme Court's recent declaration that the president, when committing acts in an official capacity, is immune from prosecution, immune from any kind of accountability. Those are absolutely concerning, and I think clear disconnect from how we might think about accountability in the law in other aspects of our lives. And so it's difficult. I think it's difficult because the magnitude and the concentrated interest and the kinds of things that I've talked about, like money, are especially challenging at a national level. The kinds of divisions are especially challenging at a national level. We cannot give up on central institutions, even as we recognize that what has happened to central institutions did not happen overnight. And it's not one person. A demagogue needs an audience to be successful. And so we have to look at the larger picture. But I do think that we can try to work to make changes within institutions, but we also, of course, have to make changes, as you note, in wider civil society when we interact with each other as neighbors, as coworkers, as friends.
So looking at that bigger picture, is there a genealogy here that we can explore? I mean, as you say, Trump doesn't just conjure this out of nowhere, but neither is the audience for Trump simply a product of this generation, I guess. Is there something we can look at historically that suggests a kind of trajectory that has produced where we are now?
I think the larger trajectory in terms of where we are now, in terms of the challenges, come from various places. Economics, certainly. We have seen in the United States and across the globe neoliberal governance, which upends the relationship of government and markets. And rather than government constraining markets and trying to account for the inevitable inequalities of markets, the reverse has happened, where markets actually kind of dictate terms of governance. And so I think that has left a lot of people feeling insecure and looking for people to blame. And so in the United States and Europe as well, immigrants are an easy target to blame when one is feeling insecure. And that's a very long-standing development, both the anti-immigrant sentiment, but also the economic forces that have shaped our current era. In the United States, it's impossible to talk about national politics without talking about race. Race has divided the United States since the founding. Of course, in our founding documents, the first draft of our Constitution, we referred to enslaved people as 3/5 of a person. And so I think there has been a very directed, targeted effort in recent years, certainly at least since the 1970s, to really cultivate a kind of racial animus that has undone parts of the New Deal, the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's coalition in the mid-20th century. So those kinds of developments are absolutely longstanding. And also, I think demographic shifts in the United States. The estimates differ, but what all of the estimates share in common is that within the next, again, depending on which estimate you look at, 2 or 3, potentially 4 decades, white Americans will be a demographic minority in the United States. And I think for a long time, parts of our politics and culture operate with kind of unspoken assumptions that reflect dominant cultures and dominant demographic groups. And as those things shift, the people who benefited from those kinds of unspoken assumptions oftentimes start to get concerned about their place. So these are all very kind of long-term shifts that have helped produce the era that we're in now.
Oh, that's fascinating. And then you throw into the mix the first woman of color to stand for the American presidency. And how explicitly does that bring some of the things that you're talking about to the surface?
It makes her an obvious target. And Donald Trump is, let's speak plainly, Donald Trump has a long history, both in politics, but also as a business person, as somebody who harbors and plays upon racial resentment and frankly, racism. And he has also a long history of misogynistic comments, especially strong women who challenge him. So when you put both of those things together in the same person, it makes her an obvious target. And I think it's hard for Trump, given the public person that he is, to resist that. You even see Republicans begging him not to be so explicit about it. And so I think for certainly for Trump and for a lot of Trump voters, this is emblematic of a change that they fear, that they're concerned about, that their own place in society is different. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it is also the case that in the last 5 weeks, I guess now, 4.5 weeks since our current president, Joe Biden, announced that he would not seek re-election, that there has been a unprecedented, certainly in my lifetime as an adult who's followed politics and studied politics, but further than that, in terms of the contemporary presidency, an unprecedented kind of change of mood. And so we will see come November what the numbers are, but there are certainly millions of people who are excited about what Kamala Harris represents.
And you're a professor of rhetoric. That doesn't mean that it's your job to give rhetorical advice. I don't always go to professors of geography if I get lost. So I understand you possibly saying you're not going to give this advice. But from a perspective of rhetorical strategy, what should the opponents of these tendencies that Trump represents be doing now in order to assert themselves?
Let's talk about this specifically in the context of the campaign, because we can talk about a larger the sort of larger phenomenon that is Trumpism, that is connected to the rise of right-wing governments across the globe. Right. But in the context of the campaign, I think that the decision, the frame that the Harris-Walz campaign has used in terms of past versus future, we're not going back, is really excellent. One of the issues, and this impacted, I think, Democratic and potential Democratic voters more than Republican voters, was the idea of a repeat of the 2020 presidential campaign. Why do we have to have these two candidates, both of whom are older white men, very close in age? I know that Biden, of course, was tagged as the older candidate in the election. Trump is 3 years his junior, and now we see Trump's age becoming an issue. But I think that the forward-looking future message really is an important one. And I think that they're really doing an excellent job of framing the race in that way. And then also the way that they have turned the phrase freedom. And other analysts have noted this. When we think about democratic values, different groups tend to emphasize different values. And Democrats, with a capital D, the Democratic Party of the United States, historically has talked about democracy in terms of equality, in terms of justice. Certainly freedom is part of the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century, but freedom hasn't been centered as much as the Harris campaign and Harris-Walz campaign has done, and they've made it mean differently. So Republicans in the United States tend to think about freedom as freedom from any kind of dictates. So I'm an individual, I'll act as I please, you can't tell me what to do. And I think what the Harris-Walz campaign has done is really given us a broader sense of what freedom means, which includes for women, freedom to make decisions about their own bodies, but also freedom in the sense of economic freedom as security, right? Freedom from fear, to go back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's famous four freedoms of the mid-20th century. So I think those are two key issues in terms of the discursive framing of the campaign, the looking forward, not back, and the effort to claim freedom and to expand what we mean by freedom.
And I suppose they go beyond the campaign to the wider picture that you're referring to as well, which is that globally there is a tension between these notions of freedom that are really central to a much bigger global debate.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's part of the sort of neoliberal project that we've seen, which is that when we think about freedom in a strictly market sense, it's a very narrow sense of what freedom means. I have the freedom, if I'm, purchasing a razor, I have the freedom to choose this brand or that. But I don't have the freedom to change the system. I don't have the freedom to fight for institutional reforms. And so I think that this broader sense of freedom also shows what's lacking when we sometimes associate freedom as exclusively some kind of consumer characteristic, as opposed to a broader political lowercase d democracy value.
Well put. I mean, because people also have the freedom to cut their throat with the razor, but it's right. up to wise others to suggest that they don't, and that's also part of this debate. So I want to kind of, by way of summary, try to ask you an impossible question. It's always good to end with impossible questions. Are we, do you think, at the high point of a kind of nightmare of rhetorical degeneration, social degradation, or might we in fact be looking at something that is a 21st century blip that is going to be overcome and that we'll write history books about and say, wow, we dodged a bullet there? I mean, what do you think?
So I should say that every time I think that we've reached a point where we can't go further, we go further. So
further down. Further down,
so I've proven wrong on that.
Right.
But I will say that I think in terms of kind of institutional politics, and we've seen examples in Europe, recent European elections turning back far-right parties, even when forecasters thought perhaps those parties in France and elsewhere would, obtain a governing coalition. I think that this is a critical election in the United States for that reason. There's been a lot of talk in the United States about this thing called Project 2025, which is a plan designed by a very influential right-wing think tank for what a second Trump administration would look like. And it includes effectively firing thousands of civil servants and replacing them with political appointees, which would be devastating for public policy in the United States. So I think that certainly in terms of our political elections, this could really redirect the course of public policy and what the United States looks like and elsewhere, in the next several years. I do think that for the Republican Party in the United States, it has been so fundamentally transformed under Trump that those who oppose Trump are no longer Republicans, or at least they're not active in the party. If you look at all of his prominent critics, they've either been voted out of office by Republicans or have left office of their own accord or have identified as Democrats. So I think that it's really going to take multiple elections. I think that for the Republican Party to disavow the kind of authoritarianism that it has embraced under Trump, I think we'll need to see multiple national elections where it becomes clear that this just won't win. And I think when it comes to professional political actors, they're concerned about winning. And if they lose enough elections, then I think that may change their mind. But there's no understating the importance of the election coming up in November of this year.
Well, Robert, your work on democratic citizenship has been an immense influence, not just on me, but on many researchers and scholars across the world. And as I expected, your comments today have been really helpful in trying to put into perspective something that I think not just Americans, but everybody around the world is quite interested in following at the moment. So thanks enormously for your time.
It's been great talking about these things.
When the history of the early 21st century comes to be written and the self-inflicted wounds to democracy analysed, I have little doubt that the political style and manner of Donald Trump will be central to that story. But who enables that style? How is such utter contempt for democracy at its very centre sustained? One of the most insightful books that I've read for a long time is Roderick Hart's Trump and Us, What He Says and Why People Listen. Incidentally, Roderick Hart was an interviewee in a previous episode, so you can hear me speaking with him. It's a meticulously researched study, and I don't want to oversimplify its conclusion, but here is what I take it to be. Trump had tapped into some of the deepest feelings of the American people, giving expression to their anxieties, vulnerabilities and resentments in ways that they could not hope to do themselves. So if Americans are to rid themselves of Trumpism, they must eradicate the profound emotional needs that give rise to such dependence. Hearing the sound of American politics today beyond the blare of the would-be demagogues, we should listen out for the muted public despair that sustains the tyrant's voice.
I'm not going to answer the question because the question is radical left. Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then have a conversation, okay?
Please.
Okay.
But we're not afraid of weird people. We're a little bit creeped out, but we're not afraid.
We did it, Joe. You're gonna be the next president of the United States.
The Sound of Politics with Professor Stephen Coleman.